What happens when one of Hollywood's most straightforward actors meets a late-night host who can't handle unscripted honesty? A clash so explosive that network executives had to step in, leaving audiences stunned and social media ablaze with controversy. The night Mark Wahlberg appeared on The Late Show was supposed to be a standard promotional interview for his latest film. Instead, viewers witnessed an increasingly tense exchange that culminated in Wahlberg being escorted off set during a commercial break, never to return for the second segment. But before I reveal exactly what ignited this firestorm between Mark Wahlberg and Stephen Colbert, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The full story exposes a side of late-night television that networks don't want you to see. Drop a comment below if you've ever noticed the facade of friendliness starting to crack during celebrity interviews. The evening started normally enough. The audience cheered as Mark Wahlberg was introduced and walked onto the set with his characteristic, confident stride, greeting Colbert with a handshake and settling into the guest chair. The first few minutes featured the usual small talk about Wahlberg's latest projects and some light banter about his rigorous fitness routine. "So, Mark, I hear you wake up at 4:30 every morning to work out," Colbert said, leaning forward with that familiar smirk he uses when setting up for a joke at his guest's expense. "Yeah, I do," Wahlberg replied with sincerity. "Discipline is important to me. It's how I've managed to stay consistent in this business for so long." That's when the first hint of tension appeared. Rather than moving on, Colbert seemed determined to mock Wahlberg's dedication, making exaggerated faces toward the audience. "Come on, nobody needs to wake up that early unless they're delivering newspapers or milking cows," Colbert quipped, clearly expecting his audience to laugh along. "Isn't that just a bit excessive?" Wahlberg, known for his straightforward manner, didn't play along with the expected celebrity interview script. "Look, Stephen, I respect that different things work for different people, but this works for me. I've built my career on consistency and hard work." The camera caught a flash of annoyance crossing Colbert's face. This wasn't the first time the host had shown impatience with guests who didn't follow his comedic lead. But what happened next surprised even longtime viewers of the show. As Wahlberg began talking about his newest film, he mentioned how the role connected to his working-class roots in Boston. "You know, I never forget where I came from." "That authenticity matters to me in the roles I choose," Colbert interrupted. "Yes, but in this political climate, don't you think there's something problematic about constantly romanticizing the working-class experience when your reality is now so different?" The audience grew noticeably quiet. This wasn't the light entertainment they had expected. Wahlberg shifted in his seat, visibly taken aback by the sudden shift in tone. "I'm not sure I follow," Wahlberg responded, his Boston accent becoming slightly more pronounced, as it often does when he's uncomfortable. "There's nothing political about respecting hard work or remembering your roots." What viewers witnessed next was a rare moment of genuine tension, breaking through television's polished veneer. Colbert, rather than steering back to safer territory, doubled down. "Well, some would say it's a bit convenient to claim working-class credibility while living in a multi-million-dollar mansion," Colbert pressed, his smile thinning. "Especially when many of your fans come from communities suffering from economic hardship." The camera briefly cut to the audience, where confused expressions had replaced the usual entertained smiles. This wasn't the playful banter audiences had come to expect from The Late Show. Wahlberg's response came after a moment of palpable tension. "Stephen, I'm here to talk about my new film, not pretenses. If you wanted to have a political debate, you should have booked a politician." The tension was building toward what would become the night's defining moment. As Colbert opened his mouth to respond, the network cut to commercial somewhat abruptly, slightly earlier than scheduled. According to inside sources who later spoke to entertainment journalists, when the show returned from the break, viewers were surprised to find Colbert sitting alone with no explanation for Wahlberg's absence. The host smoothly transitioned to his next segment, as if nothing unusual had occurred, but the damage was done. Social media was already lighting up with viewers asking what had happened during the break. According to multiple staffers who were present that night, the confrontation continued off camera with raised voices heard from both men. Network executives made the decision to remove Wahlberg from the remainder of the show, rather than risk further escalation when the cameras resumed. Rolling. What happened backstage during that commercial break revealed the stark contrast between Colbert's on-camera persona and his real temperament. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, Colbert's demeanor shifted dramatically. Ripping off his microphone, he stood up and confronted Wahlberg directly. "What do you think you're doing?" Colbert demanded, his carefully cultivated public persona completely evaporating. "This is my show. You don't get to come on here and lecture me about how to conduct an interview." Wahlberg, who had remained seated, finally stood up, towering over Colbert. "I came here to promote a film, not to be your political punching bag," he responded, his voice steady but firm. "Where I come from, we treat guests with respect." The exchange was witnessed by several staff members, all of whom described Colbert as visibly irate. One production assistant nearby could be heard whispering to another, "I've never seen him like this." "You know what your problem is, Mark?" Colbert continued, pointing a finger at Wahlberg's chest. "You think your blue-collar background gives you some special insight, but you've been rich and famous for decades now. You're as out of touch as anyone in Hollywood." Wahlberg's jaw tightened, but his response remained measured. "And you think hiding behind comedy gives you a pass to ambush your guests? I've been straightforward my entire career. Can you say the same?" Network executives were quickly summoned to the set where they found the two men at an impasse. The senior producer approached Colbert speaking in hushed tones while glancing nervously at Wahlberg. "We need to move on with the show," the producer urged. "We've got two more segments and another guest waiting." "I'm not going back out there with him," Colbert responded loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Either he goes or I go." The ultimatum hung in the air for a moment. The producer looked helplessly between the host and the guest. This was unprecedented territory for a show that prided itself on its smooth, controlled environment. "Are you serious right now?" Wahlberg asked, incredulous. "You're throwing me off the show because I wouldn't let you lecture me." Colbert turned to face Wahlberg directly. "This isn't some movie set where you get to call the shots. This is my house, and in my house, we follow my rules." The senior executive producer finally stepped in, making a decision that would later be scrutinized across the entertainment industry. "Mark, I think it would be best if we rescheduled your appearance for another time when things are less heated." Wahlberg looked between Colbert and the executive, realization dawning on his face. "So that's how it is. He throws a tantrum, and I'm the one who gets asked to leave." "It's not personal," the executive began, but Wahlberg cut him off. "Everything about this is personal," Wahlberg replied, removing his own microphone. "He planned this from the start. The questions weren't about my film. They were about trying to make me look bad." As security personnel approached, ostensibly to escort Wahlberg from the premises, the actor held up his hands. "No need for that. I know my way out." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. As Wahlberg gathered his things before leaving, he turned to Colbert one last time. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Stephen? I play characters for a living, but I'm always myself when the cameras stop rolling. Can you say the same?" Colbert's face flushed red, but he said nothing as Wahlberg turned and walked toward the exit. The production staff stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. One brave production assistant approached Wahlberg to return his personal items. "For what it's worth," she whispered, "this isn't the first time something like this has happened." Wahlberg nodded, unsurprised. "Won't be the last either." Meanwhile, Colbert was huddled with his writing team, hastily reworking the remainder of the show. "No mention of this when we come back," he instructed. "Move the musical guest up, and I'll extend the monologue for the second half." The audience, still unaware of the drama unfolding backstage, waited patiently for the show to resume. In the green room, the next scheduled guest, a prominent actress promoting her new film, watched the monitors with concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked a passing staff member. "That interview seemed really tense." "Just a slight change of plans," came the rehearsed reply. "Mr. Wahlberg had to leave unexpectedly." Back on set, the floor manager counted down to return from commercial. Colbert took deep breaths, straightening his tie and plastering on his trademark smile. All traces of the confrontation seemingly erased from his demeanor. "We're back in 5-4-3. The floor manager silently indicated 2, 1, and pointed to Colbert. "Welcome back," Colbert said smoothly, his voice betraying none of the anger that had erupted moments before. Unfortunately, Mark Wahlberg had to leave. But we've got a great show still ahead of us, the audience murmured in confusion. Several people exchanged glances, clearly aware that something unusual had occurred. But the show continued, a testament to the careful image control that defines network television. Outside the studio, Wahlberg declined comment to waiting paparazzi, simply stating, "Watch the show. It speaks for itself." He climbed into his waiting SUV, already on the phone with his publicist. Back inside during another commercial break, Colbert's mask slipped again as he berated his staff. Who vetted him? Did anyone check his talking points? We looked completely unprepared. A junior producer hesitantly spoke up. "Sir, we did provide the standard prep questions, but Mr. Wahlberg's team was told this would be a standard promotional interview for his film." "Standard doesn't mean softball," Colbert snapped. "We have a responsibility to challenge these people, even when they're just here to talk about a movie," the producer asked, immediately regretting the question. Colbert fixed him with a cold stare. "Especially then, nobody gets a free pass just because they're selling something," another staff writer whispered to a colleague. "Funny how that standard only seems to apply to certain guests." As the next segment began, the atmosphere on set remained tense. Staff exchanged knowing glances, aware they had witnessed something significant. One camera operator mouthed to another, "This is going to leak." And leak it did. By morning, audience members were already sharing their accounts on social media. "Strangest thing I've ever seen at a show taping," wrote one attendee. "One minute Wahlberg was there, the next he was gone. Colbert acted like nothing happened, but you could feel something was wrong." Production assistants reported that Colbert remained in a foul mood for the remainder of the taping, snapping at staff over minor issues and demanding the incident not be discussed. "Anyone talking to the press about this is fired," he reportedly told the team during the final commercial break, but the story was already taking on a life of its own. Audience members who had witnessed the uncomfortable on-air exchange were connecting the dots about what might have happened during the break. Industry insiders began texting each other, and entertainment reporters started making calls. The original broadcast never showed what happened when Wahlberg left the studio, but witnesses from the audience and staff filled in the crucial details. Rather than leaving immediately, Wahlberg made his way to Colbert's dressing room, where the host had retreated after their confrontation. "We need to talk," Wahlberg said as he knocked on the door. "Manto man, not for the cameras." Inside, Colbert was huddled with his executive producer and head writer, already planning how to handle the remainder of the show. The knock interrupted their strategy session. "Mr. Colbert doesn't want to speak with you right now," the executive producer called out. "I didn't ask to speak with you," Wahlberg replied, his voice calm but firm. "Steven and I need to clear the air, and I'm not leaving until we do." After a tense moment, Colbert opened the door himself. "5 minutes," he said curtly. "Alone," he added to his staff, who reluctantly filed out of the dressing room. Once the door closed, leaving just the two men, the real confrontation began. "What was that out there?" Wahlberg asked, gesturing toward the stage. "I came here to talk about a film that took 2 years of my life to make, and instead you tried to turn it into some political gotcha moment." Colbert crossed his arms defensively. "My show isn't just a promotional vehicle. We talk about real issues here." "Real issues?" Wahlberg raised an eyebrow. "Like attacking me for remembering where I came from." "That's not talking about real issues. That's trying to score points with your audience at my expense." Colbert's face flushed. "You celebrities think you're entitled to softball interviews just because you showed up." "No," Wahlberg countered. "I think I'm entitled to the interview your producers promised when they booked me. Your team said this was about the film. If you wanted to have a political debate, you should have been upfront about it." The tension in the room was palpable as Colbert moved to sit behind his desk, creating a physical barrier between them. It was a subtle power move, trying to reclaim the authority he'd lost during their on-air exchange. "My audience expects me to ask the hard questions," Colbert said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he often used when explaining things to guests who disagreed with him. "No," Wahlberg responded, remaining standing. "Your audience expects you to be entertaining. The minute you decided I needed to be taught a lesson instead of having a conversation, You stopped being a host and started being a prosecutor. Colbert's jaw tightened. You really don't get it, do you? This show has a perspective. We're not just here to help you sell tickets, and you really don't get that most people don't tune in for your perspective, Wahlberg shot back. They tune in to be entertained, to see celebrities talk about their work, maybe share a funny story, not to watch you try to shame guests who don't check all your political boxes. A knock at the door interrupted them. The stage manager's voice came through. Mr. Colbert, we need you back on set in 3 minutes. Colbert stood up, clearly relieved by the interruption. We're done here. Yeah, we are. Wahlberg agreed. But let me leave you with something to think about. I grew up with nothing, fought for everything I have, and never forgot where I came from. Can you say the same? Or have you been in this bubble so long that you've forgotten what it's like to talk to regular people who don't share all your views? The question hung in the air between them. For a brief moment, something flickered across Colbert's face, almost like recognition. Then his expression hardened again. My audience understands exactly what I'm doing, he replied. Your audience might, Wahlberg conceded. But what about everyone else? You used to be a comedian who could talk to anyone. Now you're just preaching to a choir. Before Colbert could respond, the door opened and his executive producer stepped in. We need to go now. Wahlberg turned to leave. Good luck with the rest of your show. Something tells me you're going to need it. As Wahlberg walked down the hallway toward the exit, he passed the green room where the next guest, a young actress promoting her first major film, sat nervously reviewing note cards. Everything okay out there? She asked, having sensed the unusual tension in the studio. Just some creative differences, Wahlberg replied with a small smile. Word of advice? Stick to talking about your movie. She nodded, suddenly looking more concerned than before. Meanwhile, back on set, Colbert was being prepped for his return from commercial break. The makeup artist dabbed at his forehead, which had begun to perspire under the hot studio lights, or perhaps from the confrontation itself. How are we handling this? His producer asked in a hushed tone. We're not, Colbert replied curtly. No mention of what happened. Move the musical guest up, and I'll extend the monologue for the second half. The audience saw what happened before the break. The producer reminded him, they're going to be confused if we just pretend nothing happened. Then let them be confused, Colbert snapped. This is my show, and I decide how we frame what happens on it. As the floor director counted down to return from commercial, Colbert straightened his tie and put on his professional smile, the masque of the genial host sliding back into place as if the confrontation had never occurred. Welcome back to The Late Show, he said smoothly when the cameras began rolling again. Unfortunately, Mark Wahlberg had to leave, but we've got a great show still ahead of us. The audience's confused murmurs were audible even over the applause sign. Several people exchanged glances, clearly aware that something significant had transpired. In the control booth, the director turned to the executive producer. Are we really not going to address what just happened? Boss's orders, came the reply. We're moving on like nothing happened. But the audience wasn't so quick to forget. As Colbert attempted to transition into his next segment, the energy in the studio had noticeably shifted. The laughter was more hesitant, the applause less enthusiastic. The invisible contract between host and audience, the one that relied on mutual trust and openness, had been damaged. Meanwhile, Wahlberg had already left the building, declining comment to the waiting paparazzi with a simple, "Watch the show. It speaks for itself." As his car pulled away from the studio, his phone rang. It was his longtime friend and fellow actor, Dwayne Johnson. Just got a text about what happened, Johnson said when Wahlberg answered. You good? Yeah, Wahlberg's, replied looking back at the studio building growing smaller in the distance. Just reminded why I usually stick to talking about the work. Let me guess, Johnson said. Another host who thinks their job is to put you on trial instead of having a conversation. Something like that, Wahlberg confirmed. CC thing is I would have been happy to have a real discussion about class and privilege if he'd approached it honestly. But that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted a gotcha moment, and when he didn't get it, he couldn't handle it. Back at the studio, the remainder of the show proceeded with a strange artificial quality. Colbert's jokes seemed forced, his interactions with the musical guest overly enthusiastic, as if trying to compensate for the tension that still lingered in the room. During the final commercial break, he pulled his head writer aside. "We're going to need to address this tomorrow," he admitted. "Social media is already blowing up." "What's our angle?" the writer asked. "Do we apologize, make a joke of it, or double down?" Colbert considered for a moment. "We frame it as a misunderstanding. Say that time constraints forced us to end the interview early. Nothing about what happened backstage." "Will that work?" the writer asked skeptically. "A lot of people in that audience saw what happened before the break. They know it wasn't just a scheduling issue." "It has to work," Colbert replied, an edge of desperation creeping into his voice. "Because the alternative is admitting I lost control of my own show." As the final segment wrapped and the audience filed out, the conversations in the crowd told the real story. "Did you see Wahlberg's face when Colbert tried to lecture him?" one audience member asked another. "I've never seen anything like that on a talk show before." "The weird part was how they just pretended nothing happened when they came back from commercial," her friend replied. "Like we were all supposed to forget what we just saw." That night, as both men returned to their respective homes, the contrast in their reactions revealed everything about the fundamental clash of values that had occurred. Wahlberg put the incident behind him, focusing on his family and the next day's promotional activities. Colbert, meanwhile, spent hours scrolling through social media, reading reactions, and becoming increasingly agitated at how the narrative was forming. The truth was, both men had revealed their authentic selves in that unscripted moment of conflict. Wahlberg had shown himself to be exactly who he claimed to be: straightforward, unpretentious, and unwilling to be intimidated. And Colbert had inadvertently revealed what many had long suspected, that beneath the smiling, seemingly open-minded persona was someone far less tolerant of viewpoints that didn't align perfectly with his own. In the end, the clash between these two men exposed one of the central tensions in modern entertainment: the difference between performing authenticity and actually being authentic. In an industry built on carefully constructed images, their confrontation provided a rare glimpse of what happens when the script gets thrown away and real personalities emerge. And that perhaps is why the incident resonated so deeply with viewers. In a media landscape increasingly dominated by performative moments and artificial controversies, the raw authenticity of their clash felt like something rarely seen, a moment of unfiltered truth. If you found this breakdown of the Wahlberg-Colbert confrontation revealing, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our deep dives into Hollywood's most explosive moments. What do you think? Was Colbert right to challenge Wahlberg, or did he cross a line by ambushing his guest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.